Welcome back to AgriTalk as we wrap up our visit to the offices of the U.S. Meat Export Federation here in Denver, Colorado. Joining us now is Thad Lively, Senior Vice President, Trade Access. Thad, let's talk about some of the deals that are out there, both in place and being worked on. The one being worked on is TPP, of course. We hear about pluses, we hear about potential problems, who's going to be involved, who's not. The list seems to be growing. How do you view TPP, and what are the market opportunities for the livestock industry in the United States?
Well, thanks very much. I agree that you hear an awful lot about TPP, and sometimes it's a little tough to weed through all the information. I think our perspective on this is that from a big picture standpoint, this is an important development and certainly one we're pleased to see happening. Specifically when it comes to the beef and pork and lamb industries, we don't see huge potential in the near term with the countries that are currently part of the process. We think probably the place where we have the greatest potential to benefit is if this agreement can produce some new rules on how to manage some of these technical trade issues that have been such a big problem for us.
Yeah, when we talk about Canada or Mexico being part of it, I guess my first reaction was, well, we're already doing business with them. We have NAFTA. Why do we need them in TPP? What does that bring to it if they're included?
You know, to be honest, I think we would share your view on that. We've already got NAFTA, so we got zero duties for our product going into both of those markets, and they're both important markets for us. By including them in TPP, of course, what we're going to see is that some of our principal competitors, for example, Australia, New Zealand on the beef side, Chile on the pork side, they'll probably end up having access to China and Mexico, two of our bigger markets, on pretty much the same terms we do today. So as it always is with these kinds of trade negotiations, the picture's mixed.
Let's talk about free trade agreements. And the ones particular we've talked so much about, of course, Korea, Panama, and Colombia. Your assessment of those and what they mean for livestock producers?
Well, certainly Korea is the one that has the greatest potential in terms of our sector of agriculture. It's a huge agreement for us. The implications for both beef and pork exports to Korea in the coming years are very, very encouraging. So that was a good deal for us. That was a good deal, I think, for both countries. It was certainly something that I would say is worth all the effort that both countries put into it. We will see over time as those tariffs come down. We will certainly see some big changes occurring in that market. Colombia and Panama, obviously smaller markets. I think you heard a little bit earlier from Dan on some of the marketing work we've started doing in South America and Central America. That's a region we're excited about. And so there's certainly potential there, not on the same scale, I would say, as something like Korea. But again, without those agreements, I don't think you'd see the excitement you're seeing right now.
I find that interesting, the potential in Central South America. My first thought would, well, Brazil's going to be providing them beef, and how can we beat that? So what advantages or opportunities do we have there?
Well, again, they're not huge. Neither of those markets is going to be a big volume commodity market, in my opinion. But I think there's always going to be demand in these markets where you've got good economic growth, you've got a growing middle class. In some cases, like Panama today, you have a fairly large tourism industry. There's going to be a demand for our products in the quality and the value associated with both beef and pork coming from the U.S.
We were just talking about Russia. Let's talk about the significance of Russia and the WTO and what that could mean for the U.S. livestock industry.
Well, that again, I think, is an area where if you talk to the people who are doing business there, there's a lot of enthusiasm for that market. Last year alone, we did close to $500 million worth of beef and pork exports to Russia, and as Greg discussed earlier, our exports there so far through the first half of this year are up considerably for both products. So, getting them into the WTO has been important. The agreement works well for us. It puts us in a very strong competitive position for both beef and pork. I think the big question mark that hangs over Russia in the minds of most of us in the industry is whether Russia, now that they're a member of the WTO, and that'll take place in another few weeks, is going to really come around to that science-based trading principle that's so fundamental to the rules of the WTO. I think there's going to be some work that needs to be done in that area.
Interesting. I think back to the 70s when everything was Russia, Russia, Russia when you talked exports. And, of course, China's kind of taken that spot now in many ways. But here's Russia coming back again more and more as a key market.
Well, certainly for beef and pork. And I think that's going to continue to be the case for a while. If you followed the developments there, especially on the beef side, there has been huge growth in our exports of beef to Russia over the last few years. And frankly, that's largely been due to the fact that some negotiations have occurred leading up to them joining the WTO that created opportunities there. And the WTO agreement itself expands our access to the market. It continues to be a controlled market and a market where they're working under quotas. But the truth is they don't really have a beef industry. There's some efforts. I know there have been a lot of live cattle going from here to Russia over the last year or two. There's a lot of interest in that development. But the truth is they don't really have a beef industry as we know it. And there's big demand for the product.
That's an important factor. A country with a strong livestock sector, then you get into the protectionist issues and barriers that are thrown up. So that's a big part of when you're developing a market.
Well, that's certainly true, and honestly, in Russia, that's what we see with pork. Russia has spent billions and billions of dollars on developing their domestic pork industry, and they're making progress. They've got a lot now of modern production units in Russia, haven't kept up so much on the processing side, but they've set a goal, as a number of countries that we export to have done, of achieving self-sufficiency, and basically getting to the point where they not only produce enough pork to feed themselves, but they're actually become an exporter. So as we talk about Russia and the potential there, we need to be clear that their goal as a policy matter is to produce enough pork that they don't need to import. So we'll see how that plays out. They're going to have trouble competing against imports, and under the terms of their agreement for them to join the WTO, the duty on pork goes to zero. So we're gonna see how it works when we're competing there against some of the other principal exporters, Brazil, the Europeans, et cetera, on a level playing field. And we'll also see how it plays out as far as the Russian industry itself is concerned.
Real quick, is there a market out there flying under the radar that we should be watching that could become a real good market for U.S. meat?
Well, I think you've probably talked about a lot of the ones that are of greatest interest. You mentioned Australia, which is a market that's grown a lot. And again, there's some potential through the TPP if we could get some of their sanitary barriers eliminated. I think a part of the world, if you talk to the people who are out there looking around the world for new opportunities, I think a lot of interest is now being shown in sub-Saharan Africa, to tell you the truth. So there's some potential out there that remains untapped.
We will be watching. All right, Thad, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thad Lively, Senior Vice President, Trade Access for the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Hopefully you now have a better idea of the work that's going on all around the world to move U.S. meat products in markets and the challenges we face in some of those and the efforts that are underway to help move more. And we've had a lot of successes, certainly, over the years. Tomorrow we're in Omaha for the American Coalition for Ethanol Conference. Hope you'll join us right here on AgriTalk, the voice of rural America.